Hello and welcome to this presentation. My name is Rian Stackpoole, and this PowerPoint is going to go over transgender women's health in the United States. More so discussing who transgender women are, their cultural strengths, the barriers that they face in healthcare, some major health disparities, and current community efforts to help improve healthcare outcomes. Alright, to get started here, we are going to go over some definitions on sex, gender, and who a transgender woman is. So sex. This is an assigned characteristic at birth, which is determined by the person's sex chromosomes, such as XX, XY, triple X syndrome, and XXY, also known as Klinefelter syndrome, as well as their reproductive organs at birth. Gender, on the other hand, is determined by one's behavior, how they socialize with other people, and who they feel that they truly are. The definition for a transgender woman is someone who is assigned male at birth, but their gender identity is female. Okay, brief history of trans women. So it's hard to exactly know when the first trans woman was, birthed on this earth exactly. But just to be clear, trans people, trans women and men have always existed and will continue to exist. Just because it's been, a lot of LGBTQ plus rights have been implemented into our law and policies, and they've been able to feel more comfortable with coming out. It's not like there was this huge surge of people becoming trans all of a sudden. They've always existed. It's just that now it's safer than it was before. And in Native American communities, they actually have a name for trans people, or those who do not identify with their sex at birth, and they are called two-spirited. Okay, continuing with history of trans women. This slide I have chosen 3 historical figures who are trans women that have made big progress for the trans women that we have today. The top left is Frances Thompson. This is the first known black transgender woman to stand up against Congress to give her testimony on the 1866 Memphis Massacre. On the bottom, this is Marsha P. Johnson. It is the black trans woman who was a gay rights activist and was a prominent figure at Stonewall. And there have been some stories saying that she was the first person to throw the brick at Stonewall, which was basically there to incite and politicize how badly that police brutality was affecting the LGBTQ plus community at the time. And that Stonewall protest got a lot of publicity, and it was able to stop the police brutality that the LGBTQ plus community was experiencing. And the last person on the top right is Renee Richards. She is a professional tennis player who was denied entry into the U.S. Open, which led to a Supreme Court case that resolved in her favor and established legal precedent for trans athletes. Okay, cultural strengths and values. A very big cultural strength of trans women is their community. The LGBTQ plus community is very important to trans women to be able to rely on. And a lot of trans women and people in the LGBTQ plus community have what are called chosen families. So it's kind of how it is in the name. Instead of their blood-related family members, they have their friends and people in the community that they can rely on and connect to and celebrate one another. And another really important cultural value that trans women in the LGBTQ plus community have are their vernacular and the words that they use. So it's more than just, having fun with these words. It's very important to them because it's not only showcasing their strength and resilience, but it's giving them an identity. It's telling them, showing the world that they're not scared to differentiate themselves from other groups of people and to show that they're here and they exist. Okay, next are barriers to health equity for trans women. Trans women face discrimination and stigma in healthcare settings, making them not feel as seen and understood when trying to access care. This leads to less seeking of healthcare because they do not want to put themselves into more uncomfortable situations. Okay, continuing with barriers to health equity, a social determinant of health that trans women face is poverty. They are coming from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, and because of the other barriers that they face that we're going to get into after this slide, it's causing 1 in 3 trans women to be in poverty, which is almost the highest amongst these group of people on this chart, provided by Equitable Growth. And the highest is actually trans men, which is a little bit above 30%, looking like 34%. Okay, the last slide on pillars of health equity is about intersectionality. I think intersectionality is probably the biggest, most prominent barrier that is restricting trans women's access to health care. I mean, if you think about it, a trans woman, if they are not white, let's say they're a person of color, now they are not only facing potential transphobic people, but now they're facing racist people. And they are now also having to face a world as a woman and face misogyny and stereotypes that follow with that. And with being a trans woman, depending on the sexual orientation of that trans woman, she can also face homophobia. So all these are compounding factors that contribute to our health disparities. Okay, next we are going to talk about the top 5 health disparities and some leading causes of death amongst trans women. So here we're going to be talking about cardiovascular disease, HIV as a health disparity, suicide, violence and murders, as well as touching on poverty again. Alright, so cardiovascular disease. Researchers have found that trans women and non-binary individuals are at a greater risk of diabetes, coronary heart disease, and myocardial infarction. Cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death in the United States, and on top of the confounding health disparities trans women face, it only makes sense that this is also their leading cause of death. Alright, next we're going to talk about HIV diagnoses. HIV is a very prevalent issue in the LGBTQ+ community and affects trans women's health. With trans women being in a lower socioeconomic status compared to others in the U.S., it makes it harder to access care and receive treatment or prevention such as PrEP. And PrEP is a medication taken daily to help prevent the risk of infection from HIV-infected people. And continuing on to HIV diagnosis. This chart here is displaying different groups of transgender people, such as the Hispanic community, the Black community, white, Asian, and so forth. And would you look at that, going back to intersectionality, the number one group of people who are diagnosed with HIV are the Black and African American transgender women. So that just proves another point of how the confounding factors of having to deal with things such as racism, as well as being a member of the gay community, that just leads to less access to things such as PrEP and more people in the community getting diagnosed with HIV. Okay, another leading cause of death amongst trans women is suicide or mental health related deaths. So among trans populations, prevalence estimates for attempted suicide range from 10 to 44%, much higher than the estimated 4.6% among the general U.S. population. So it ranges almost 10 times as much in the general U.S. population, 10 times. Furthermore, the prevalence of suicidal ideation among trans populations ranges from 37% to 83% across studies. So this suicidal ideation really comes from feeling alone, right? That goes back to why trans women have chosen families. You know, they're outcast from their family members, told that they're monsters, that they have no one, that they're wrong. And all these things are in their head, and they start believing it if they have no one to turn to. And sadly, suicide is an option that some of trans women choose. Okay, the next topic is violence and murders. Trans people experience higher rates of serious violence, assault, and violence-induced injury than do non-trans populations. There are roughly 300 trans people who were murdered between 2008 and 2020, and the vast majority of them being trans women of color. And then the last health disparity being poverty. As previously mentioned, trans women experience poverty at a much higher rate than non-trans people. Anti-trans stigma promotes widespread discrimination and stereotyping of trans people, which reduces trans people's access to critical resources needed to promote health and well-being, such as health care, housing, and employment. Okay, looking at the brighter side of some things here, what are some current efforts that the community has come together to help trans women? and other transgender people. So there's a transgender law center, which is here to advocate legal policies and policy work to help expand protections for transgender people. There is a Trevor Project, which is a crisis intervention and suicide prevention organization for LGBTQ plus youth. There is a Fenway Health and Callan Lord clinics, which are helping provide gender affirming care and integrated services. There's also the Trans Lifeline, which is a support hotline that is there for people to call if they are having those suicidal thoughts and they just feel lonely and they want someone to talk to. Okay, some final reflections. I was surprised to see how many trans women have influenced our laws and protections that we have for trans women and other members of the LGBTQ plus community today. A majority, if not all, of the policy changes and laws protecting queer individuals came from trans people fighting for change. And just thinking back from Francis Thompson or Marsha P. Johnson, and just thinking about how there were so many things in society systemically that were against them at the time, and how they had the courage to be able to persevere and fight for change for themselves and for the future trans women that live today. It's just really remarkable. Okay, continuing on with some final reflections. I would say this project serves to show how being open-minded and being able to have conversations with people of the transgender community to help understand something that you don't. I think is very important for healthcare professionals to understand that they are not going to know everything about the gay community and about trans women or trans men. You know, practicing cultural humility, saying I don't know is probably the strongest thing that you can do, and just being able to sit there and listen and understand what they're coming to you for and not being closed-minded. Not making those judgments early on, not having a stigma towards them is really important to help increase their access to care and also increase their confidence in the healthcare system and increasing that trust amongst the community. Okay, and that leads us to the end of the PowerPoint. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did making it and learning about trans women. These are my references. And again, thank you so much for listening. All right, bye-bye.